Mark, take it away, dude.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pat. I want to welcome everyone for a special World UFO Day episode of The Psychic and the Doc. And we have a very special guest today, Colonel John Alexander, who served in Special Forces in the U.S. Army. He holds a master's degree from Pepperdine and a Ph.D. from Walden University. He also attended UCLA, MIT, and the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. Colonel Alexander joined Los Alamos National Laboratory, where he was instrumental in developing the concept of non-lethal weapons. He has advised NATO, the White House, Congress, Council of Foreign Relations, the Department of Defense, the Central Intelligence Agency, the U.S. Special Operations Command, and the National Intelligence Council. John is arguably one of the most dynamic experts on supernatural phenomenon in the world. He headed up a special UFO project for the U.S. military, and he was instrumental with Project Stargate, which explored the uses of psychic abilities using remote viewing and PKMB, psychokinesis metal bending. His travels around the world have included diving with humpback whales and great white sharks. He's also studied with shamans in the Amazon and in Mongolia, and studied voodoo witch doctors in Africa. He even encountered an isolated Stone Age tribe of people in New Guinea. Dr. Alexander appears frequently on TV, including Dateline, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and news programs around the world, including The Psychic and the Doc. He's published dozens of articles and written several books. His latest are Reality Denied and UFOs, Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities. Dr. Pat and I are honored to welcome you to the show, Colonel John Alexander. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, yahoo. Great to have you.
Yeah, great to be here.
So John, I met you a few years back in Seattle at the International Association for Near-Death Studies annual conference. And I have to say that one of the most fascinating discussions I've ever had with, well, anyone, was you about UFOs. And tomorrow is the World UFO Day. Now, what I don't understand is that the Roswell incident in 1947, supposedly a UFO crashed right near Roswell, New Mexico on July 7th. I'm not sure how World UFO Day ended up being July 2nd, but it is. So because you ran a UFO project were serving in the military, can you tell us what was that? What did you do, and when was this?
Well, this was mostly in the 1980s. We went for almost a decade And I had participants from all of the services, from the intelligence community, from the civilian aerospace industries. They were all at the top secret, and if you know the SCI level clearances and that, it was literally an old boy net, meaning that we're did happen to be all males at that time, and we were interested in what's going on. Our premise, by the way, was that there was a deep dark program, and that one of two things would happen: either we'd be invited in, or we'd get slapped severely about the head and shoulders for mucking about where we shouldn't be. And neither happened. It was quite surprising. I might say, if you compare this to ATIP, the more recent program that you probably know about, basically our findings were nearly identical, even though we were 30 years ahead of that. And I will say Lou Alessandro was more successful in getting funding than I was. But that's sort of the essence of it.
Well, just as a point of clarification, UFO, we all know, stands for unidentified flying object. And I understand now the term UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, is the accepted term. But I think tonight, let's just stick to UFOs on that. Now, you said something very interesting. You said that recently they've had more luck in getting funding. So the project that you ran, was this specifically funded, or was this something that the military kind of did through the back door?
Well, no, this is something I did, I guess, through the back door. People used to ask what's your job, and I'd say I'm a freelance colonel. Which was now, to be fair, I had a day job, a main area that I was assigned to and whatnot, but I was in a position to have a considerable amount of flexibility. And we did that, and I said for years. And then what happened was, eventually, if you remember SDI, what's known colloquially as Star Wars.
Star Wars, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Well, I ended up with the director of Star Wars, Lieutenant General Abramson, who had the biggest program in the Department of Defense at the time. And so we decided to transition from there and say, okay, how about funding us? Now, the war story that goes with that was that he really didn't know the topic before we arrived. And so I opened the topic and said, here's generically what we're talking about. And this went on for about 5 minutes. And I had introduced all the people from the various agencies who had accompanied me. And then he goes, wait, who are you guys really? Like, this can't be real. As we went around, and when we got done, he says, wow, as an old fighter pilot, this is pretty interesting, but I can't touch it. And he says, I'm already doing some hairy things, but if I get caught doing this, they're going to just nail my budget. Now, he was already, because he had a $5 billion budget, he was already under attack for people looking for the money. But the point here that is significant is that even though we had pretty much convinced that there might be something to this, it was still politically too risky. And if you look at the report that was just released by the Pentagon, one of the issues they talk about is stigma being attached. By the way, he did get dinged for the tune of $1 billion. So, wow. I mean, there was reason to be concerned. That had nothing to do with our efforts. It was just competition for funding.
So Dr. Pat, you have the latest report here.
I do. And, I got to tell you, when I think about this, can I just this is now me going into my commentary mode, Colonel, Doctor. So I imagine what it would be like to be you. I had a minute of that. I really did. I'm a closet John Alexander. I just got to say. And, I'm a kid from the Bronx. who started to see UFOs. Like, I mean, there are UFOs in the Bronx. I just want to say out of the gate, Colonel, I'm just saying.
Yep.
But to live the life you've lived, and this is a comment, and I've read your books. As a matter of fact, I'm probably going to quote from one of them in a minute. But you never waffled, you never gave up. You know, you stayed true to the course of your truth. And then the report comes out. What is it, 6 days ago? The report comes out.
Friday.
Yeah. A lot of conversation about the report. I read the report, you know, and there are more details in the report. But I love the part where they say something like, paraphrasing, well, we don't have enough like evidence of something. There's like a line in there. And I want to ask you this. Here we are today. We've got the report. We're moving forward. You've written a ton of books. You've lived your life. You have spoken up when people don't speak up. Do you think we have a bright future on this topic? Do you think we're finally going to get to have a conversation or not?
What I usually tell folks is, you want to see the scars? you do get beaten up on occasion. I think the main thing the report did is it's starting to make it okay for people to make these reports. When I give presentations, one of the things I have on there is I have a personal mission, and that is to try and make it permissible for the best and brightest to be involved in studying these things without risking your livelihood or career. And for many people, these things are not career enhancing. You can ask Lou Elizondo, who was the guy who exposed most of this just a few years ago, and of course had to retire to do that.
Yeah.
There's still a considerable reluctance to report. Now, in my view, probably the most important line in that report has to do with, yes, the 144 cases, 143 they can't determine, but 80 of them talking about multisensory data.
Yep.
So I've watched these skeptics complain about, oh, there's just, fuzzy video and whatnot. The video is not the evidence. The video is the confirmation of all of the other things where you have multisensory data saying, yea, verily, there are physical objects out here that we are tracking.
Yeah.
In the research I've done and in my discussions with you previously, John, the term AATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, always surfaces. Can you tell us what that is?
Well, that's the program that Lou got formally started. Now Harry Reid is one of the key people. I never got into the congressional levels, and they were able to get several Stevens, one other, and Harry Reid to come forward and say, we're going to make this happen. Marco Rubio also had a lot of credit for. It's interesting because this bill literally came out of COVID.
Yeah.
It was tucked into a COVID. These are the kind of caveats that they threw in, but it made it mandatory for the report to come forward. My guess, and from what we can see, is Pentagon and DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, really don't want to play. Even so, from what I've heard, there's a lot of infighting there as to, the reports that are mandatory to come forward. One of the most interesting things that happened last Friday, in addition to the report, but the Deputy Secretary of Defense put out a memo that says, yea, verily, thou shalt report these things.
Yep.
Now, we'll see if that, but that's adding impetus and trying to make it, gives cover to people so that they can come forward. But again, the most interesting thing, and I've heard all the skeptics, and they usually attack the videos, but it's the multi-sensory data. These are not isolated events. They're, repetitive confirmation.
Yeah. It was 80 out of 144. I mean, I found that interesting in the report, and then I went on to read what they talked about. I think it was 80 out of the 144 that involved observation with multiple sensors.
But it's also, frankly, my guess, I'm pretty sure about this, that's a really low number from the number of incidents that were really happening.
Yeah. Do any of us really believe 144 is the number?
Well, they have said that basically the fleet on the East Coast for a while was having incidents daily.
Yeah.
So
I guess it's like my mama used to say, something better than none.
Oh, it is. And again, the main thing is to destigmatize this.
Is.
So what we need, I'll make a big leap here because and that is, where do we need to go?
Yeah.
And I said, with the best and brightest, as you know, the first line of my UFO book is UFOs are real. And I mean, some of them are hard physical objects. The last paragraph is something like, and whatever this is, it is more complex than we can possibly imagine. And I think that we are looking at something that's at least as complex as cancer. So we're just piddling around the edges. In fact, I say that we're not at the point of even asking the right questions yet.
Yeah.
This comes up a lot in the news, and a lot of the skeptics say, well, this could be Russian or Chinese aircraft. All right, you're in the military, you're special operations. Do the Chinese or the Russians have something this sophisticated that changes direction and can go faster than our jets can intercept them and have no visible propulsion system?
Short answer is no. And to them, I say, riddle me this. How do you go from 0 to Mach 500, not Mach 5, Mach 500 in under 2 seconds? And oh, by the way, we did that in 1957. So no, nobody on Earth has that kind of technology.
And see, that's what's so fascinating is there have been reports of these since the 50s. Supposedly there was an incident at Roswell. But, when you look at ancient accounts, I mean, there's some people that think that Ezekiel's chariots of fire. I know Eric von Daniken wrote a book with that title, but it appears based on a review of history that this is nothing new. This is not a 20th or 21st century phenomenon.
No.
That these have been documented for centuries. Do you
millennial?
Yeah, they have.
Yeah, it is millennial. Jacques has a pretty good book out on that. Alexander the Great actually has a UFO incident in Southwest Asia.
Wow. So you start your book with UFOs are real. What do you think they are?
Well, first of all, I start by saying, what do you mean?
Yeah.
And when I say, no, let me clarify. We got little balls of light. I've got hard craft miles across and thousands of variations in between. So what is it you mean by a UFO? And as you know, I've come down against stovepiping. And I mean, where we start assigning values, is it a UFO to the thing? And then we set parameters as to what's acceptable for studying and what's not. And that, I think, is a big mistake. So we have many kinds of videos, UFO sightings and whatnot. One of the things that's troubling to me is if we get into contacts and whatnot, is that we supposedly have visitors coming, across the galaxies, and somehow have divided up Earth as to where different types of vehicles are going to go and different things, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. If you think of it, it's unless Earth is on the galactic bucket list of places you got to visit.
Yeah. I loved in the book when you talked about this, because as a kid, this was kind of a very innocent way of looking at it. And I think one of the things you say, that you're convinced that there's really no single concise explanation that fits all the data. And, you know, it is really so wonderful to know that, because to put this in the context of a unidimensional perspective, to think, for us to think, one, that we're the only folks around, that there's that thought, right? But then to think if there are these other folks around that kind of all alike.
Well, I happen to come down against the extraterrestrial hypothesis, meaning little gray guys from Zeta
Exactly,
Reticuli
right.
or something like that.
Right.
Okay.
And one of the reasons is there have been reports of interactions between humans and sentient non-humans, again, throughout the entirety of human history, in various shapes and forms and all cultures. So to say it's, somebody coming from a single place, is it ET? In my view, is just does not follow the data. It's not, the answer, I think, is far more complex.
In what way? And we've had this discussion a number of times, and in one of our discussions, John, you were explaining that the theory of relativity, Einstein's theory of relativity, says that nothing can exceed the speed of light. And I remember you said that these are not tin cans flying through space for thousands of years from some other solar system to get here, but that they're able to fold space time and actually make a leap from one coordinate to the next. Can you expand upon that?
Well, in my view, well, I think we need to do is to look at phenomena in a much broader context. And I've been involved in a host of those things. It's just if you're trying to get from, it's the classic argument, you can't get here from there, wherever there is, just based on these things. I'm going to take it back a step further, and you get to Max Planck, and some of the thinking now on people who are looking at consciousness is there's no physical reality arises from consciousness. It's not that we have consciousness in addition to, or somehow in our brain or something of that nature. I'll give you some examples that are a bit disturbing. And that is how the phenomena have morphed over time. Now, if it were a straight physical phenomena, you would expect consistency over time. And you do see, silver craft again over millennia. One of the classic ones that got my attention was one Jacques Vallée had, and we're turning the turn of the 20th century, i.e. early 1900s. And this guy's driving around a mountain in the state of Washington. And all of a sudden he says, hovering there is a UFO. It was heptagonal, 7 sides. He said, and I could see every rivet. And you go, wait a minute, within a few years, there's no way in hell you would be going across space with rivets. So it was ahead of their consciousness at that time, but not, technology that's 1,000 years in advance. Before that, in the 1800s, we had craft that were kind of floating through the air and literally stopping and dropping anchors and things of that nature. And so as we watch these things, again, the technology keeps morphing, and it seems to be that it's morphing in concert with where our consciousness is going.
That's fascinating. So we're being visited by something, but the official story, because the reports keep saying UFOs are real, but we still don't know what they are. And you were saying that it's as complicated as cancer. So something is coming here. It's highly advanced, but what is it? And the other question that I have is, and I think you partially answered this in your last explanation, is that you see some consistency in the type of vehicles, but are there different types of vehicles, objects being identified?
Oh, absolutely. Now, um, you know, one of these problems is that this thing keeps expanding and expanding, and trying to get it down into something as easily quantifiable is difficult. From U.S. government perspective, they are seeing a certain number of certain types of vehicles that are within their airspace, and that's of specific concern. Probably the biggest concern has to do with air safety. Quite frankly, there's been the Navy talked about a number of near misses where we've had civilian airliners with near misses.
Yeah.
There's even one case in Mexico that supposedly, as it was landing, scraped into something. What are they? Again, the descriptions just vary so much, but some of them certainly have physical characteristics. One of the characteristics that these reports talk about, though, is the Klingon cloaking device, where they just instantly seem to dematerialize and be there. You have transmedium phenomena. We're talking about flying objects here. Face it, with these, we also have submerged objects, and we have things that can transition, from the air into liquid, i.e. the sea, back out again without seeing any major changes. I mean, that just defies our notion of how we're thinking about, there's no technology that we know of that we don't have anything that doesn't go into the water, doesn't splash, for instance. And yet we see things going in that don't. So it's like I say, it's as complex as you can possibly imagine. And the problem is we look for solutions that don't fit all of the data. And this is especially true with the skeptics. What they do is they glom onto one tiny aspect and say, here's what I think it is, so therefore we will, announce this as being solved, and just nonsense.
Yeah.
I might mention George Knapp in UFO cases. There's a video that was recently released where you see pyramid shaped objects, multiples of them around the thing. On the program, George Knapp had one. He was instrumental in bringing a lot of the data out of the former Soviet Union. He had been there before the collapse, and he has pictures taken in Latvia, basically that looks like the same widget, only this was, I think it was 1968.
Wow.
Part of this, what we're talking about, I want folks to understand a little bit about, the sense of your work that really gets at so many different levels in a strange way, validated outside of everything, because when we're talking about these incidences and you look at the report, people may kind of blow it off, but when you look at the percentages of things, they're really quite interesting. We're talking 18 incidents, right? Described in 21 possible reports where people reported UAA movement or pattern flight characteristics. So they're talking about movement, and they're talking about like what you show in your book. When you start to talk about the speeds of things, and you start to talk about, well, this is what it is. Can something really go at 4,000 miles per hour? And then what I loved about this is, as the conversation develops, when you talked about the pilots and the near death and the near misses, 11 of these were recorded. And see, what I love about data is that what you get in data and data sets is like the tip of the iceberg kind of thing. It's like that thing that if it makes a report like this, it's the thing at the top that has passed through so much scrutiny. And, I want to talk with you about perhaps what your book shows that this report doesn't touch upon. Why don't we take a break, Mark? What do you think?
Yes. And if anyone would like to call in to ask our guest, Dr. Colonel Dr. John Alexander about extraterrestrials, UFOs. The number is 1-800-930-2819. I'm Mark Anthony. I'm with Dr. Pat, my co-host on the Psychic in the Doc, and we have Dr. John Alexander, UFO expert. We'll be back in just a minute. I'm Mark Anthony, and I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Pat Baccili,
Yeah.
street smart spiritual behavioral psychologist, and we're doing a special World UFO Day episode, and our guest is Colonel Dr. John Alexander, former head of the U.S. military's UFO project. If you want to find out about Dr. John Alexander or his books, kindly visit his website, johnbalexander.com. John, thank you for being on the show.
Yeah.
Dr. Pat, I think we have a caller.
I think so, Jacob. Let's go.
Sounds good. We're going to bring on Edwin from Washington. We've got Edwin from Washington.
Hey, welcome to the show. You're live right here on the Psychic in the Doc. How can we help you?
Hey there, Dr. Pat, Mark Anthony, and Dr. John. I just have a big question for Dr. John here.
Sure.
Okay, big fan, John here. I just, one question. It's been on my mind ever since I've been seeing this on the news, all this stuff about UFOs. And do you believe there are extraterrestrials living amongst us on this planet? And what would their purpose be for that?
Love this question.
Well, it's a most intriguing question. One of the things you might find surprising, there was a Roper poll done a few years ago, and 20% of the global respondents thought that ET was here and walking among us. That would not be my take per se, but if I might get back to one of the questions that Mark, and this is related to it, that Mark asked in the last segment, and what is that? I come down against the ET hypothesis, and that is we start looking at interdimensional or ultra-dimensional, and some suggest time traveling. But this actually gets Mark into your main field. We start talking about, other dimensions and
yes.
the physical reality of such, and being able to particularly transfer the information. To the caller's question, I don't think so, but there's certainly no reason why it couldn't be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, thank you
go
so
ahead,
much.
Edwin.
Thank you.
If you have another question, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to see do you believe extraterrestrials aren't from this planet, but if they're interdimensional instead?
Interdimensional. I love that question too.
Yeah, well, like I say, they talk about interdimensional time travel and some ultra-dimensional as well. Again, if we get back to what I said, I think the fundamental concept here is consciousness, and we do not, in my view, understand probably even the basics of consciousness. So some of this can be, our own creation. Things that we precipitate into physical reality.
Yeah. I want to jump in with the caller for a minute, and I'm going to get a little controversial here for a minute from the field that I come from. Here's a theory that I have. And, I've mentioned this theory before, and my colleagues are probably going to send me like a bunch of emails here. They're probably going to throw me out of the APA. There's this notion that we have our pop culture. We have all the movies that have come out, right, John? Right, Mark? I mean, on both of y'all's field of expertise. I mean, from where? They've come out from black and white versions of things. They've come out. So the question I always get asked in the field that I'm in is it the chicken or the egg? And my answer is it's both. They came together. And nobody likes the answer. But the reason I'm bringing it up is to the caller's point is this. Are we that brilliant that we can conjure up imaginatory phenomenon in our pop culture movies about things we know zero about, even before we had technology to fly over the pyramids, right? So what I love about us as human beings is that we are either extremely imaginative, which I think we are, or there's something that is here in the here about how we start to project what people call fakeness in our movies, in the X-Files. I don't care what they are. Now there's like a new one, the Debris. That's a whole new one. And I've always been wondered about this. I've always thought, even as a little kid, I thought they didn't get that idea. That idea was planted. So this is where I am. I grew up with something like this where maybe it's me and I don't think enough about humanity to be that creative without getting some extra help in it. I don't know.
Well, and this gets to the caller's question too, but this is strictly hypothetical. What if they are us?
The emails are going to come now, for sure, John.
If you look at, evolution, if you're familiar with speciation, and that is periodically you see big leaps that are not accounted for by your normal evolutionary process. And there are those who suggest that at some point in antiquity, somebody came in and mucked about with the DNA and started the process rolling. And in fact, the suggestion then goes that, what they're doing here is checking on the experiment.
Yeah. I don't know how many people, I mean, thank you for Men in Black, because now we know that both Oprah, David Bowie, and a bunch of other people were aliens. But, the point is, look at your body of work, John, right? I mean, I used to get written in my performance reports in corporate America that they literally got great reports, but they thought I was from another planet. And I used to look at that and say, that's an insult. But when we start to think about this, what's going to get us? What's going to get us to where we really need to go, John? Help us get to where we really need to go. Colonel John, Dr. John, Colonel. Because I was reading your book and I was like, oh, he was friends with Dr. Hal. I don't even know if I'm going to have time to talk about the Hal Teller thing. But how do we get to where we need to go without drugs?
I don't know if you know, well, I know Mark has met Stephen Schwartz, but he used to talk about Homo noeticus, meaning being a significant step in human evolution. As I look at human history, I think it's a miracle that we've survived to get this far along. I mean, you start looking at... Oh,
my goodness, yes.
As a species, we do like killing each other.
That's right.
I mean, and I'm being facetious, but
that's not facetious, though, unfortunately.
Truth.
And and I appreciate you saying that, John, because no one has to tell a soldier like yourself what the cost of war is. Mm-hmm. You've seen it up close and personal. And I hear people saying, "Oh, the military, they're warmongers." My dad was a Navy SEAL. He did not like combat. For him, it was a necessary evil. But I don't know anyone in the military who actually wants war. I have a question. It's been my understanding that over the years, any pilot, particularly a military pilot who has reported a UFO, was immediately grounded. That's what I heard. And I don't know if that's true. And if it is, has that changed in light of the recent press releases and disclosure, or so-called disclosures, from the U.S. government?
No, but it was definitely not career enhancing. And there's a classic case in this, was the JAL flight, Japanese Airlines, over Alaska, where they saw a huge craft. They said bigger than an aircraft carrier floating out there. It had ground confirmed radar from various locations that said, yay, there's a big object out here, and it was traveling with them. And he went and landed and did report it. For his efforts, he was fired, not for reporting that, but for embarrassing the company. And so for many of them, it's definitely, and it was certainly true in the, I think, well, cross DOD pilots, not something career enhancing, even when the programs were ongoing. And again, this was a terrible stigma attached. So no, you wouldn't automatically be grounded, but you would certainly be under considerable skepticism. I might give you a side story here,
Yeah,
but
please.
Yes.
Please.
no, it's related. A number of years ago, when I was working with Bob Baccili, we had NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science, and we met with the FAA. It turns out that I knew a senior official at the FAA, and so we went to talk to them about getting the FAA report. And for a number of years, it may still be true that if you check their manuals, it fix you to Bigelow as a place to report it. The key thing, though, was we met with several executives there. The ones who had been air traffic controllers, and had come up through the process, had no problem. I mean, they had heard these things, but it was one of those things. Do you want to report it? No, that's okay. But the stories were certainly there again within the FAA and in a number of airline folklore. But again, we get back to you need to do this so you don't risk your reputation or livelihood.
Go ahead, Dr.
Go ahead,
Pat.
Mark. Well,
ladies first.
No, but you go. I mean, I've been called a lady in over a decade, so you probably should go. Go ahead, Mark.
Should we be concerned about whatever these are?
Should we be concerned about? Well, one of the things I've had recent conversations is, well, we fear this. And what I've suggested, everything you fear is not a threat. Your field, people fear ghosts and things of that nature.
Right.
That does not constitute a threat.
Correct.
I can make a strong argument both ways for that whether the military should even be involved in this.
Right.
And specifically, if you go back to the Condon report, the question to Condon was not, are UFOs real? This is the end of Blue Book. But it was, is this a threat? And he came back and said no. And I think he was right there. Where he was wrong, in my view, is when he said, and there's nothing that can be gained by studying this. So I do think, on one hand, the military has an obligation to look at things that are interacting with their systems. On the other hand, as stewards of public resources, i.e. your tax dollars, how much are you willing to spend on something that you have a very low probability of being able to resolve? What I mentioned before is complex as cancer. Yes, but we spend billions and billions of dollars on that and make incremental approaches. My guess is, and people, it's kind of substantiated, around the world, if you look at all phenomena, not just UFOs, the amount of research dollars available is probably around 10 million per year. And so I bumped that up against the Large Hadron Collider, for instance, looking at the God particle, very small particles of interest to theoretical physicists, and that's a billion a year on its own. You look at the cost of a man day in space, tens of millions of dollars per man day just to keep people up there. So we have these research and development. One of the things you have heard, if you look at the defense budget, I follow those things, the research and development dollars have been hit very hard. That's considered a bill payer, if you will, in many areas. So there's some really, really tough decisions. Can I take it a step farther and tell you what I think we need?
Please do.
Yeah,
yes,
that's
sir.
what I want to know. What do we need?
What I think we need is something like the Human Genome Project. Remember that went on for several. Now you had a definite outcome, but what you did is you had an international approach a number of countries involved, the best universities, and most importantly, data sharing. And with that approach, they were able to come in under budget and ahead of schedule. But it's going to take something like that. And the secrecy is just an anathema to resolving these kinds of problems.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's an interesting point, if I can follow up on that,
Yeah.
because we've seen from IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies, and I believe you were president of IANS at
Right.
one point, that it's global. It's global. I mean, on Instagram and Facebook, there's an Iranian branch for IANS, and normally you would think, you know, in a country that's essentially a theocracy, they'd be putting the kibosh on that, but their scientists and medical professionals don't want to. There's also been near-death experiences reported and reports from China, so we're getting them all over the world. And from what you're saying, that's what we need with the UAP, the UFO phenomenon. We need our best
All
and
phenomena.
brightest.
All
Yeah.
phenomenal.
I'd extrapolate it.
Yeah.
This should be, you need to look at it more broadly. And this is one of the problems is stovepiping, is deciding it's just this, it's just that.
Right.
It needs to be much, much broader approach. And as I point out, if you look at where we spend our dollars for research and development, it seems like, again, airfield, the post-mortem continuation of consciousness ought to be of interest to 100% of the population.
One would think.
And yet when you look at the R&D, it's limited. Yeah.
Yeah.
I worked at Bell Labs, and this is my influence a little bit. You know, after I was saved from being homeless at 17, you know, I was go to work for them because they don't fire people. And I got to work at Bell Labs, and interesting enough, they put a crazy kid like me in the mail route to deliver things to honor Penzias and those people, the big bang people. And at a very young age, I got to see sound rooms. I got to talk to people. And it's interesting, as I grew up in the company, I realized how important Bell Labs was. And even recently, there was an article that came out that Nokia confirmed the Big Bang Theory. But see, this was a think tank to me. Yes, it took funding, but this idea of basic research on these people and how this guy was able to somehow spend telephone money dollars to do this, it's almost like it's a lost art to me, Colonel. It's almost like if it wasn't for people like you bringing the message to the forefront and then explaining us now what the report doesn't say and how we can all engage and participate, I'm afraid that this conversation will get to be a lost art. So I really want to know, what's the future for you? Where are you going to take us? Are you going to take us on? I got to ask you, because look, Captain Kirk, let us know, what is the frontier we are to go now?
Well, this, you know, I mean, I'm a dinosaur. And what we need to do, you know, what we need is, again, to get the best and brightest and young. I'm going to go way out on a limb and something I have been thinking about, and definitely gets into Mark's area. And I'm a firm believer in reincarnation, so that's a starting point. And so one of my questions is, who were you? And I think there's a need to start looking at folks like mediums to start investigating who's coming.
Yeah.
I would mention when I was in Mongolia, the shamans there, one of the things they did was tell you, okay, who is it that's coming back into the system? I'd like to see the ability to find early on these best and brightest and facilitate their growth. And I think that can move things much more swiftly.
Wow. We got a caller. Do we have time? Can we do that, Mark?
I would love to. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Jacob. Who do we have?
Perfect. We've got Chip from Florida. Hey there, Chip.
Hey there. Hi, Chip. Welcome. You're live on the Psychic in the Doc with
Hi,
Colonel.
how are you guys?
Yeah, Colonel's here. Oh, great to have you. How can we help you today?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Doctor, and Mark. I do have a question. for the Colonel. I'm actually located near Cape Canaveral. I've got a lot of friends that work for a lot of the military-industrial complex. So one of my favorite party tricks is to, when we have a party here, I wait until they've had just quite enough drinks to start asking the really tough questions about what they know and don't know. So I actually have a slew of questions, but in listening to what you guys have been covering tonight, I'm going to kind of narrow it more down to what do you think is going on with this secret space force that now suddenly is considered a new space force? They've renamed Patrick Air Force Base, acting like as if this is something brand new, when most of the information I'm hearing is it's not new. It's been around for a very long time. It was just considered secret. They've now come more public. And the one big question that everybody keeps asking is, how can you have a space force if we don't have any ships actually out in space at this moment? How is that even possible? And clearly, does that mean we do have craft that's out there and this is all part of the information that's now coming public? Does that make sense?
Well, we absolutely do. It's called the ISS, International Space Station.
Do we need a space force for that?
No, if it comes down to in the conspiracy realm, if you're talking about that space force, I don't believe it exists. And one of the ways you can look at that is if you look at the NASA budget under Apollo, it was 4% of the national budget. Right now, NASA's at about 0.4% and struggling to maintain.
Yep.
I think it was a political gimmick more than anything else. Now, having said that, all of the services rely heavily on space-based assets from, reconnaissance communication. Most people don't realize that 95% of the DoD communications goes through civilian satellites.
I love that we're talking about this topic, and I love that caller question, because there's so many ways we can go, and this hour it's gone like it's flown by. It's like, what is it, 0 to 4,000 miles per hour? Yeah, that's like one of those things, sensory things. I got to thank you for joining us here today, but also for a lifetime of work. And, they make great movies out of dinosaurs, John. Jurassic Park, they do. If it wasn't for you and your body of work and your continuing chutzpah to really come forward and explain things to us, how are we ever going to transfer this knowledge to future generations? So I want to thank you. Mark, how about you?
Absolutely. And what I'd like to say to all of our listeners, if you want to expand your mind and rock your world, I cannot recommend Colonel Alexander's books enough.
Yeah.
Reality Denied and UFOs, Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities. To find out more about our guest, visit his website, johnbalexander.com. John, always a pleasure. You know what? I think you need to come back, because we didn't even get into talking about your work with psychics. And
not at all. Not at all. Thank you so much for all that you do. John, one last question. I want to know what your personal message is. I would not like to know what you'd like to leave us with. And of course, make sure we know how to find out more about you.
Well, the biggest thing is we need to get the best and brightest involved in research in all of these areas, and that they do so without risking their livelihood or career.
Love it.
Thank you. What an honor to have you on the show, sir.
Yeah. For those of you out there, if you missed any part of this, it's going to be available, and hopefully John will come back. If you haven't read the report, and I'm just saying, it's not a secret thing, you can go get it. It's available, and it's called a preliminary assessment. You love that. Preliminary assessment, unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP. It was issued June 25th, 2021. It's free to download and free to read. Thank you all for tuning us in and turning us on. Mark, as usual, thank you for Absolutely stunning question. John, thank you for a body of work and keeping us all on our toes. And thank you, Jacob and the producers, for making sure that we actually go on air. That's a phenomenon. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time. Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning into The Psychic and the Doc with Mark Anthony and me, Dr. Pat Baccili, right here on transformationtalkradio.com. Hey, look, come back next week so we can explore with you more of life's many challenges and learn from fascinating guests. And you know what? Even Mark and me. We'll connect you and discover insights from people in this life and from the afterlife. Extraordinary problems? Yeah, they do. They require extraordinary solutions. But step into the world of possibilities with us on The Psychic and the Doc. That's every Thursday, 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on transformationtalkradio.com. That's transformationtalkradio.com. And don't forget, we're also live face-to-face on facebook.com, Transformation Talk Radio.